John Wilcox is my name. I am a 54-year-old Louisville, Kentucky freelance writer. For obvious reasons, which will become clear, I am using a pseudonym. Over the past few years, I have become fixated on trying to find the truth behind the enigmatic LBL beast reported across the land between the lakes area. It all began in 2020, on a solitary camping trip in the land between the lakes. Hoping to catch a sight of the elusive species that had captivated so many in the area, I had gone far into the forest. I sat silently by my campfire as evening descended, listening closely to the noises of the surrounding woodland. The hair on the back of my neck stood on edge as a bone-chilling wail suddenly sliced over the darkness. Desperate to see the LBL beast, I reached for my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound source. And then I saw it. A huge, monstrous figure whirling quickly amongst the trees, its bared fangs and brilliant eyes obvious even in the low light. Terror and awe mixed together as I froze, then watched the thing vanish back into the darkness. Though something kept me back, I wanted to chase it after trying to record this amazing glimpse. An intense fear engulfed me, and I knew I had to leave those woods fast. It happened again in 2021 when my elderly mother moved in with me following a severe fall, rendering her unable to live on her own once more. One evening, we both noticed something unusual moving in the trees just off the highway as I was driving her home from a doctor's visit. "John, did you notice that?" my mother exclaimed. "It seemed like some sort of animal, but larger than any usual animal I have ever seen." I slowed the car and gazed closely into the night, but whatever it was had disappeared into the thick vegetation. Though the experience unsettled me, I told my mother it was most likely only a deer or a big dog. I kept wondering about what we might have seen as we drove the remainder of the way home. I started seeing more and more stories in the local press over the next few weeks regarding alleged sightings of the LBL beast, a big bipedal creature that seemed to be prowling the isolated wilderness areas around the land between the lakes. The descriptions were consistent: a huge wolf-like monster with dark fur that slid between the trees with amazing speed and agility. Inspired, I set about some of my own investigation. Searching the internet for any information about the LBL beast for hours, I came across little specifics. With few concrete data or scientific analyses, most of the reports appeared to come from local people and visitors. Though rampant conjecture and stories centered around the monster, no one seemed to have any actual solutions. I even paid some visits to several libraries. The volume of material gathered on the LBL beast is astounding. The issue is that most of it ran counter to each other. There is ample evidence for the beast, but people disagree on what it is. Some claim it is just Bigfoot. Others claim there are werewolves roaming the woods who are based on European lore and Native American skinwalker traditions. Of course, the skeptics claim it's all a big hoax or people mistaking a bear for something else. Not deterred, I resolved to travel down to the land between the lakes area in order to probe deeper. Driving the meandering back roads and traversing the lonely paths over several days, I kept my eyes open for any hint of the elusive species. None of the local people, hikers, or park rangers I spoke with could provide me any specific information. Just when I was about to give up, deep in the land between the lakes, I came upon an old deserted military post. The region was completely vacant, with crumbling buildings covered in grass and rusty fences. As I looked about the location, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something sinister was occurring there. I carefully investigated the crumbling enclosure and discovered that several parts of the fences around the perimeter had completely collapsed. Grabbing the chance, I hurried across a fence gap and onto the overgrown area while my heart thumped. The buildings themselves were in a similarly run-down state. Their windows and doors begged me to enter and look around further. From one building to another, I searched for any hints that would help to clarify the enigmatic background of the institution by cautiously peeping around corners and through doors. I first heard the telltale sounds in one of the bigger administrative buildings, loud, guttural growls that seemed to be emanating from some distance below ground. Nervous but following the sounds, I descended a creaky staircase down to a network of poorly lighted underground hallways. My discomfort grew more pronounced the longer I traveled. A sophisticated electronic lock mechanism locked every hefty steel door in the hallways. Though I understood breaking those boundaries would not be simple, my curiosity and will drove me on. I eventually arrived upon a considerably more strongly guarded area of the subterranean complex. Looking through a small window in one of the doors, I saw movement. A big burly man walking back and forth in a reinforced enclosure surrounded by heavily armed troops. Then it dawned on me, terrible reality. This was no typical military establishment. It was a covert laboratory where the government was experimenting with some sort of genetically modified organism under warped guidelines. And that creature, I knew, was the notorious LBL beast. Terrified but not ready to give up, I looked about for any security flaws. Then I came upon an old maintenance tunnel, overgrown weeds partially hiding a rusted metal grate. I inhaled deeply, prying the grate open and slinking down the small, poorly lighted passageways till I emerged in a shadowy observation room with a view of the LBL beast's enclosure. From this vantage point, I personally saw the soldiers' brutal treatment of the creature, watching in horror as they probed and tormented it with electrified batons. The reverberation of the LBL beast's cries of suffering and agony sent chills down my spine. Hidden in the darkness as I crouched there, I realized I had discovered a top-order conspiracy. The government, within the walls of this abandoned base, was concealing a terrible secret that they would do anything to conceal from the world. Driven to expose the whole truth about the LBL beast and the government's evil experiments, my heart thumping in my chest, I headed back through the maintenance tunnel and out of the building. Then I realized I had found a scheme of horrifying scope. The LBL beast sightings over the years were proof that some of these genetically engineered monstrosities had escaped the boundaries of the military's covert laboratory and were now prowling the earth, not the result of some mythological creature wandering the woods. Turning back to my car, I felt as though I was under observation. And I was correct. A man stepped into the beam of my headlights exactly as I approached the brink of the woods. Though his face was hidden in the shadows, he was a commanding presence with eyes that sent me straight back off. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he said, his voice low and stern. I stammered, not sure what to say. He said, "Listen to me," moving toward me. "Forget everything you observed outside of here. Not the LBL beast. If you know what's best for you, you'll keep quiet about this entire issue." Shaken and perplexed, the man turned and vanished back into the darkness before I could even reply. I had to go quickly from there. My pulse thumping, I gently made my way back to my car and drove off the deserted military installation. I was afraid for my own safety, even though I knew I had to tell the authorities what I had seen. If the government sought to silence me in order to hide their perverted experiments, what would happen? I painstakingly collated all of the material I had acquired over the next few weeks, cross-referencing news stories, first-hand experiences, and my own notes. I understood I had to exercise caution. I couldn't immediately announce my discoveries without strong evidence. But I started to see odd events around me as I got ready to tell a friend who was an investigative reporter my findings. They tapped my phone lines and I caught glimpses of shadowy individuals observing from a distance. I became certain that the government was upon me, and they would do whatever it took to conceal their secrets. Fear paralyzed me, and I realized I could never present what I understood publicly. The risks were simply too severe for both my family and myself. Hoping to completely eradicate any sign of my research, I erased all of my notes and proof. I am constantly plagued by anxiety, continually monitoring my surroundings and anticipating the government's eventual intervention. The LBL beast's truth is still buried, and the world might never know the terrible reality of the species lurking in the land between the lakes. Still, I know the truth, and it torments me every waking second. Real, the LBL beast is, and the government's horrific tests go on today. And I can only pray that my silence will last long enough to keep me alive.